Welcome to the lead. I'm Jake Tapper. This hour, Vice President Harris is preparing to face reporters in Mexico as President Biden preps for his first trip abroad as commander-in-chief. Major tests for the president's foreign policy, that's ahead. Plus, the most comprehensive government report yet into the January 6th insurrection, except the report pretty much avoided using the word insurrection. And that's not the only thing that was left out. And leading this hour, breaking news. President Biden is done. A Biden administration official telling CNN that infrastructure talks between the president and the lead Republican negotiator, Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, are over. Instead, Biden is going to shift his focus to a bipartisan group of senators dealing with this issue. Let's get straight to CNN's chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, we know that Biden spoke to Capito this afternoon for just 5 minutes. What went wrong?
I think, Jake, a lot needed to go right here for this talk to actually have been productive. It was pretty clear where this was headed. They were on the verge of collapse, but now, just hours before President Biden is set to leave, excuse me, these talks have actually collapsed, Jake. And this comes after about a 5-minute phone call that happened between the White House, President Biden and Senator Capito earlier. And now in a statement, Senator Capito is saying it was President Biden's move to end this discussion and these negotiations that had been going on for several weeks between the two sides. And the White House is not disputing that, saying essentially that they could not come to an agreement on what the number needed to look like. We had seen Republicans slowly inch up. We had seen President Biden come down quite far from where his initial infrastructure proposal was. But ultimately, they could not find a way to meet in the middle, Jake, because not only could they not agree on how much to spend, they could not agree on how to spend it. And the White House doesn't feel like they came up with a sufficient way to pay for this bill without using those 2017 tax cuts. That was what Republicans said was a red line for them to undo any of those tax cuts. But in the readout that we're getting from Senator Capito's office, who until now has been the top Republican negotiator, she says that while I appreciate President Biden's willingness to devote so much time and effort to these negotiations, he ultimately chose not to accept the very robust and targeted infrastructure package and end their discussions, arguing that they could not also agree on the way that the White House wanted to pay for this infrastructure proposal. So, Jake, these talks are now dead in the water after going along for several weeks. Progressive Democrats have become increasingly frustrated with how these talks have been going, saying it's time for the White House to move on. But what else complicates this is that there is a timeline that Democrats on the Hill have wanted to pursue here, but President Biden is leaving tomorrow morning to go to Europe for over a week. Now, we should note his chief of staff, Ron Klain, has been expected to stay back and not go on that trip. It's presumed that he will take a role in helping shepherd these negotiations wherever they do go next from here. And of course, we do still expect President Biden will be involved, but he'll also be meeting with other world leaders as we figure out where these talks are going to go from here.
Caitlin, stick around. I want to keep talking about this, but let me also bring in CNN Chief Congressional Correspondent Manu Raju live on Capitol Hill. Manu, now we hit Plan B, these bipartisan working group. We had Senator Tester on the show in the last hour. He's one member of it. Tell us more. What do we know about them? What do we know about what they've negotiated so far?
Well, they're still working on a proposal. In fact, they are meeting tonight in about less than an hour. They're going to discuss exactly what they can agree on along bipartisan lines. What's unclear, though, is whether any sort of deal can be reached among this group and whether that will be enough to win over both parties, including in the Senate Democratic caucus. And behind the scenes, Jake, there has been frustration, ample frustration among Senate Democrats about the efforts to craft a bipartisan deal with Republicans. And now also this new bipartisan effort that is ongoing, that is being led by Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Also part of that, Senator Joe Manchin, the West Virginia Democrat. On the Republican side, Mitt Romney of Utah, as well as Rob Portman of Ohio, are among the senators taking a lead here on the talks. But there is frustration among Democrats in the Senate who say, look, if they move this far and get a deal, they're probably not going to go as far as we want. And there's a push among Democrats to essentially scuttle this effort altogether, and high skepticism that any deal that can be reached among this group would win over a majority of the 50-member Senate Democratic caucus. So Senate, what's unclear, though, is how long Senate Democrats will allow those talks to move forward. What is under discussion right now, Jake, is essentially a two-phased approach. Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, is indicating indicating he is prepared to go it alone, try to pass a bill along straight party lines, allow these bipartisan talks to continue, and see if they can't get a deal on that, try to move things along this partisan Democrat-only process. But they need to get the support of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to succeed in that approach.
Right, and that's key. Manu, stick around. I want to bring in Gloria Borger. But that's key, Gloria, because you can't get Sinema and Manchin to go along with the Democrat-only bill as of now,
right,
when they're negotiating this bipartisan deal. Their whole thing is we need to exhaust every bipartisan possibility. They have to let this go forward, the Democrats do, if they even want to get to having the 50-vote bill.
Sure. And then waiting in the wings is Senator Bernie Sanders. Don't forget, I mean, this afternoon, he said, his patience has run out. And he said, we're going to start, he's the chairman of the Budget Committee. He said, we're going to start marking up the budget, which would include a lot of this spending, as soon as July. So, and I've spoken with him about it, and he has said he has very little patience for these negotiations. They're going to continue. And I've also been told the White House is aware of what he is doing. So they're trying to work on two tracks. And I think their big question is, if the bipartisan effort, the newest one, falls apart, which, you could say the odds are more than 50-50, can they get 50 Democrats? Can they get Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin to agree on one spending bill? Yeah. And that's their really big problem right now.
And Caitlin, so is the White House going to allow this two-track process to go forward? Progressives, people in the House of Representatives, Bernie Sanders going forward as if they're going to have a Democratic-only bill. And then, meanwhile, Manchin, Sinema, Tester negotiating with 3 Republican senators, trying to have a bipartisan deal, and whichever one works is probably what will happen?
Well, and remember, Jen Psaki said earlier that they do expect President Biden to talk to that group of senators today, or at least before he leaves to go on his trip. So they are trying to put some stock into that plan B. It's kind of been bubbling underneath the surface here in Washington for a few weeks now, in case we are in the situation that we're in right now, where those talks with Capito's group in the White House had collapsed. So they knew that this was an option that was going to be facing them, but they are also under increasing pressure from progressives on what to do and whether or not to just move on. And I think progressives have been annoyed, basically arguing that despite these offers and counteroffers, it hasn't actually gone anywhere. And now they're going to have more of a leg to stand on with that argument now that this has collapsed, and they're moving on to the next group of a bipartisan group to try to talk to them about what this can look like. But I think the White House is also pushing it off on the Hill, saying, well, they are moving along with markups and the process basically that they would be going through to do and pursue a Democrats only bill. So they do know that that option is out there. But I think if you see that happen, the White House is just going to argue, well, we did try to talk to Republicans. We did come up. They've been pretty precise about what those numbers were. And we just don't think that this is actually going to ultimately end up being a bipartisan bill, but saying it's not their fault is kind of the argument that they have in their pocket right now.
Manu, what's interesting about all of this is it's so difficult for Democrats to govern with a 50-50 majority. I mean, bare majority. They're only the majority because they have the White House, too. And somebody's cursing Cal Cunningham in North Carolina right now, I'm sure. But beyond that, this is popular stuff. Spending hundreds of billions of dollars on bridges and roads. I mean, the American people have shown a tremendous tolerance for deficit spending. They don't really seem to care much. And, bridges and roads. So it kind of feels odd that we're even having this intense conversation.
Yeah, and it's really bogged down over the years on this issue because the two sides just simply cannot agree on how to pay for such a package. Democrats have, in this particular proposal, have sought to raise taxes, particularly on corporations and the like. Republicans have tried to repurpose existing money, COVID relief money that has not been spent. That has been the nexus. There's a reason for this that has the talks collapse. But you're right, Jake. The 50-50 Senate is causing major problems for Joe Biden and his domestic agenda. They're not going to be able to get a major voting legislation through to overhaul election laws in this country. They're not getting immigration legislation passed. It simply seems highly, highly unlikely. Other issues such as stemming gun violence, highly unlikely. The one aspect is this infrastructure package, because it's a budget-related issue, can move along party lines on this reconciliation tactic. But again, you need all 50 Democrats to agree to it.
And Caitlin, let's go back to you because I understand you have the official White House readout in your possession.
Yeah, and this is from Jen Psaki. It's a statement we just got a few moments ago, Jake. They're saying that, yes, President Biden did tell Senator Capito that what she had put forward did not meet the requirements he had for an infrastructure bill. It does also notably say that he spoke to a few key figures today, including Senator Kyrsten Sinema, Senator Joe Manchin, and Senator Cassidy as well, and urged them to continue their work with other Democrats and Republicans to work on and develop a bipartisan proposal. So 3 very key names that President Biden also had conversations with today. It's unclear if those conversations went longer than his talk with Senator Capito did today. It also does say he plans to stay engaged on this effort while he is in Europe. He's got aides back here, Steve Ricchetti, Louisa Terrell, others who are going to be working on this. And one more call that the president did have today, Jake. He also spoke to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to discuss the need to commence work on the budget resolution process so the legislation to advance his economic priorities can move forward this summer.
And Gloria, I guess institutionally the big question is, does this all mean basically, do you think that most Democrats are ultimately going to go ahead with getting rid of the 60 vote threshold, the filibuster?
That's really a hard question to answer. I think that has a lot more to do with voting rights than it has to do with budget proposals. And I think it has a lot to do with where Joe Manchin ends up on voting rights. And I think right now, when it comes to the budget, I don't think anybody has any more appetite for a kabuki dance about how many Republicans can you get to sign on to this. I mean, even if they get a couple, maybe then Joe Manchin would come on board. But again, you have the progressives out there. You have Bernie Sanders out there. They don't see any problem, as you were saying, with spending money on infrastructure and taxing corporations for it. That's very popular. So when it comes to the filibuster, I think it's going to be on something that is, much more long-standing for people in their lives and their futures. And I think it's going to center on voting.
Yeah, John Tester, Montana, and Angus King, Maine, both told me they're more likely, even though they're not in favor of getting rid of the filibuster, they're more likely to do it when it comes to a voting rights bill.
Yeah,
Gloria Borger, Mani Raju, Caitlin Collins, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it. Coming up next, Vice President Harris on a trip focused on immigration. She still has not gone to the border. The VP talks about that ahead. Plus, a secret trove of IRS files exposed, showing how big-time billionaires are getting away with paying almost nothing in federal income taxes. Uncle Sam, that's next. A stunning report today in our Money Lead revealing exactly how much money the richest of the rich make in the United States versus how little they pay in federal income taxes, sometimes even nothing at all. ProPublica says it obtained top secret IRS tax files for the thousands of nations wealthy, and among notable names, Elon Musk, whose wealth grew $13 billion between 2014 and 2018, yet he only paid about 3% of his wealth in federal income taxes. And then there's Michael Bloomberg. He only paid about 1% in federal income taxes of the $22 billion he earned in these 4 years. Jeff Bezos added $99 billion in wealth between 2014 and 2018 and paid less than 1% in federal income taxes. The king of avoiding taxes in the U.S., according to this report, is Warren Buffett. His wealth grew by $24 billion in that 4-year period, yet he only paid 0.1% in taxes, 0.1%. Unbelievable. This is primarily the case for 2 reasons. One, the United States taxes individuals on their income, not their wealth. And 2, our tax code is full of loopholes. Let's bring in Paul Keel. He's one of the reporters putting out this ProPublica report today. Paul, congratulations. Fascinating stuff. Typical Americans pay in tax brackets, income tax brackets, around 20 to 30% on their income. How are these multi-billionaires getting out of paying so much to the IRS?
Well, I mean, the form of income that's most comprehensively taxed and is actually easiest to tax is wages. And, these top 25, we analyze the top 25 according to Forbes. Generally, these are people who sit atop, vast holdings of stock of companies that they've started, like as with Jeff Bezos with Amazon. Jeff Bezos pays himself a salary of, $80,000 a year and has for quite a while. And that's common of a lot of, founder CEOs, which sometimes gets celebrated for that. But we're pointing out is, that is a form of income that is taxed at the highest rate. And in order to, have income on your taxes, you have to realize your income in some way. So if you like are Jeff Bezos and you're sitting on top of this wealth and you're getting richer by the day, that doesn't get transformed into income. You don't have to put that on your tax return until you sell your stock generally. And Warren Buffett is the cleanest example of this. He's sort of famous for holding. He doesn't even take dividends. His company doesn't pay dividends. So when you look at his tax return, he looks more like a very well-off person, the top 10,000 or so earners in the U.S., but he doesn't look like the sixth richest person in the country.
Right.
And that's the pattern we see over and over again.
So in response to your report, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said today, first of all, that more needs to be done to make sure that high-income earners pay their fair share. She also said this. Take a listen.
Any unauthorized disclosure of confidential government information by a person with access is illegal, and we take this very seriously. The IRS commissioner said today that they are taking all appropriate measures, including referring the matter to investigators.
Well, that would seem to confirm that the tax returns you obtained are real, that they're referring it to investigators. But how did you know that the tax returns you obtained were real?
Yeah, we took a lot of steps of comparing stuff that was that had appeared in the public domain in different ways. We did an exhaustive amount of work with the data, and specifically for this story, we approached everyone who was mentioned in the story. We said, here's what we have, here are the numbers that we have, gave them a chance to respond. A number of them did. You have responses from Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn, and others in the story, and no one has disputed the figures.
So journalistically, there is an ethical question here, and I'm not faulting you. I wouldn't have made a different decision, but I wonder, when you discuss this with your editors, given the unknown provenance of the documents, I mean, you don't know where they came from. It could be a foreign actor, theoretically, right? I mean, was that a discussion you had?
Yeah, well, our main concern was it authentic, and was it tailored for us in some way, and that was not the case. We had to work for months on this to get it into a shape where we, were satisfied that it was accurate and it was saying something clear. And so, that was our main concern, was that, we're not being led into something. We have a chance to sit with this for a long time and come to our own conclusions, which is what happened.
All right, Paul Keel, thank you so much. Congratulations on the big scoop. I want to talk about it with Richard Quest, who's CNN's business editor at large. And also with us, CNN economics commentator Catherine Rampell. Richard, let me start with you. So Senator Elizabeth Warren, she has proposed a way to get around this issue by proposing a wealth tax, which would be a 2% tax on an individual's net worth above $50 million. She tweeted today in response to this ProPublica report saying that it shows, quote, our tax system is rigged for billionaires who don't make their fortunes through income like working families do, unquote. What do you think?
Well, I think there are two things on the ProPublica report. The first is that the tax code is full of loopholes, and you can't blame the rich for making use of loopholes. Remember the old saying, there's nothing wrong with avoiding tax. Every person's duty is to avoid tax. The problem is evading tax. And the reality here is there are loopholes in the system which these people have been able to exploit. And I'm not sure you should blame them for exploiting things. You can blame them for lobbying, you can blame them for putting them there in the first place, for arguing for them, but they are there and Congress can always remove them. The second thing is, I think taxing on wealth rather than income does create some difficulties, because what you do when the wealth goes down on those years, do you then, as Donald Trump did, manage to claim a tax loss? A tax loss, by the way, that Donald Trump was able to roll forward for many years thereafter. Taxing wealth is a great and beautiful idea, to quote the president, perhaps, the former president, but the reality is it's difficult to do. There are inherent problems and the loopholes still remain. You start with the loopholes and then you worry about the wealth.
Catherine, ProPublica writes about quite an interesting year for Jeff Bezos, saying, quote, in 2011, a year in which Bezos' wealth held roughly steady at $18 billion, Bezos filed a tax return reporting that he lost money. His income that year was more than offset by investment losses. What's more, because according to the tax law, he made so little, according to the tax law, he even claimed and received a $4,000 tax credit for his children, unquote. So again, as with almost everything in the United States, the scandal is not what's illegal, it's what's legal. But the guy has $18 billion and he takes the tax credit?
Yeah, you mentioned exactly the phrase that I was going to offer up, which is that what especially when it comes to the tax code, what is scandalous is what is legal, not what is illegal. And by the way, I should disclose Jeff Bezos personally owns the Washington Post, which I work for. But look, this is the tax code working as it was designed to do, as we collectively as a society have programmed it to do. We could make different choices here. We could change the tax code so that people who are very high net worth individuals do fork over more money to Uncle Sam every year, or more frequently in any event. You could do that a few different ways. For example, the main subject, the main cause for all of these high net worth people paying so little income taxes is that basically we only tax most assets when they are sold. This is called the deferral benefit. So you could get rid of that deferral benefit. You could do mark to market for assets, which is complicated for a lot of reasons Richard, I'm sure, can go into. You could have what's called a retrospective wealth tax, which is when these assets are sold, you kind of like work backwards and figure out how much they would have paid if they had marked to market every year. You could do more radical things like having a consumption tax, so that when rich people borrow against their assets in order to fund their lifestyles, they're still paying taxes on the boats and mansions and whatever else they are spending money on. Of course, consumption taxes have other problems, including that they hit poor people as well. But these are choices we have made as a society. Elizabeth Warren has offered one possible proposal, which you mentioned, an ongoing wealth tax, but that could potentially have some constitutional issues as well as administrative ones.
And Richard, Warren Buffett, we should note, he's long been trying to get higher taxes for the rich. It was 8 years ago when he famously pointed out that he paid lower income taxes than his secretary. Why is changing the tax code so difficult for those who have the power to do so?
Lobbying, money, army of advisors. There's an entire industry. I was going to say cottage industry. It's not. It's a vast industry that's designed to find the loopholes. And if you can't find a loophole, get it inserted into a piece of legislation so that you reduce your taxable income. That's the reason this is so egregious. That's the reason it's so offensive. And remember, Jake, the tax code has to be universal. You can't have a Bill Gates tax. You can't have a Jeff Bezos tax. It's got to be a tax for all billionaires. It's got to be a tax that applies across the board. And ultimately, it has to be seen to be fair and manageable. And the reality is that the people who get the worst side of it, I'll tell you who gets the worst side of it, the upper middle classes and the middle classes in the sense, because they don't have the assets or the ability to manage to use the tax code to their benefit. It's usually income from wages. Whereas the super rich have this wealth investment income, or not income, asset gain, and they manage to play it to their benefit. But until Congress does something about it, it will continue however badly it smells.
But it sounds to me like all three of us agree that the viewers watching right now have every right to be pissed off about this. Richard Quest, Catherine Rampell.
But be angry at Congress. Angry at Congress. That's what you should be angry at.
Yes, be angry at Congress. Well, I'm a little mad about Bezos and that child income tax credit. That's a little much, but I'll just say that's me. Thanks so much. Good to see you, both of you. Coming up, disturbing new details, social media posts. Our national lead today is about the most comprehensive government report yet about the January 6th insurrection. The report was released today by a bipartisan group of senators and reveals new details about the security and intelligence failures and the extent of communication among the rioters weeks before the attack. But the report, compiled by the Senate Homeland Security and Rules Committees, has some glaring omissions, as CNN's Whitney Wild reports.
Focused on the U.S. Capitol Police because, in no small part, because Congress has to compel the Capitol Police to give them information. They're basically the boss in this scenario. Capitol Police has said that the fact is no law enforcement agencies knew that there would be, it ended up being basically a small army descending on the Capitol. They say the intelligence just never supported that conclusion, Jake.
All right, Whitney, thanks so much. Let's talk about this with Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone. He was one of the officers who heroically defended the Capitol on January 6th and joins us now live in studio. First of all, let me just say face-to-face, we've talked before, but face-to-face, thank you for what you did that day and what you do. I want to get your reaction to the report. What do you make of the fact that they had to not use the word insurrection as a, in the other outside of quotes and footnotes? They couldn't declare that it was an insurrection because they didn't want to lose Republican senators' support.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was significant, but I wasn't surprised. I guess that word is triggering for some members on the Hill, but it doesn't change the fact that it was an insurrection.
And what do you make of the fact that the committee decided not to explore how then President Trump incited what happened, or even just looking into the origins of how all these people ended up in Washington, D.C.? I mean, very few of the people there were Washingtonians. There was a move to get them there, and the report didn't go into that.
Correct. Yeah, so, I mean, I'll be full disclosure, I only looked at the Cliff Notes version of the report. 127 pages. I started falling asleep just during the summary. But so I thought it was a good start. I mean, it addresses physical security concerns. It addresses the lack of dissemination or even proper collection of intelligence, and it addresses some training and equipment concerns that I think are very important to U.S. Capitol Police officers. But like you said, it doesn't go into the root causes. Some of the questions that I still have are, who are these groups that were involved in the insurrection that day? What is their, if any, communication that they may have had with members of our government and their staff? And also, where's the funding for these groups coming from, and what type of communication had they had prior to January 6th?
Those are great questions. Kind of unbelievable that Congress doesn't want to have a commission to explore them, or I should say Republicans in Congress, most don't want to have a commission to explore them. Why do you think that is?
I mean, unfortunately, from a lot of the conversations that I've had, I feel like it's just not politically advantageous for certain members of the government to to investigate or look into those things. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on the reasons why, but I mean, ultimately, I think there's concerns about re-winning the House and Senate. But I think some things are more important than the future of a political party.
Yeah. Now you're not a part of the Capitol Police. You're part of the Metropolitan Police Department, which is the D.C. Police. But the Capitol Police's main intelligence unit, we learned, was aware of the potential for violence in the days and weeks ahead of January 6th. Not everyone was aware in terms of Capitol Police officers. Were you aware as an MPD officer? Did you have an inkling, or were you told that there might be violence that day?
Yeah, I mean, as an MPD officer, I was aware of the fact that there was some significance behind January 6th. Again, like I work in primarily a narcotic-centric unit within the department, but I knew that our leave had been restricted for that entire week, and also days off had been canceled. What we refer to as like an all-hands-on-deck event for January 6th. So that told me that someone in the department knew that there was some significance and potential for violence on January 6th.
When you see the rebroadcast of the rally that day, where then President Trump said what he said, and where Rudy Giuliani talked about trial by combat, when you see clips of President Trump lying about the election today, what goes through your mind as somebody who was there literally putting your life on the line to defend the Capitol from these people who had been lied to and were violently trying to get into the Capitol to change the results of the election?
Yeah, I mean, when I listened to the rhetoric that was used in the speeches leading up to the insurrection at the Capitol, I mean, there's no other word to describe it, at least from my perspective, than incitement. And in some degrees, I would go even further and say that it sanctioned that behavior, certain rhetoric that was used by certain individuals that day. I mean, to hear people after the fact downplay the events, knowing what I went through and what hundreds of other officers went through that day, I've said before, it's disgraceful.
So you have said that this report does it's a good start, you said.
Correct.
But does it whitewash some parts of what happened?
I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it whitewashes it. Again, I haven't read the entire report. I did, like I said, found it was, interesting that they omitted, the word insurrection, even though that's obvious what that event was. It was an insurrection. It was, violence perpetrated by individuals against the U.S. government. Yeah.
All right. Officer Michael Fanone, thanks for what you do. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Former President Obama is also giving his take on the aftermath of the Capitol attack. In an exclusive CNN interview, he told Anderson Cooper that some right-wing media outlets are to blame for not only riling up their viewers, but profiting from their fear.
There are certain right-wing media venues, for example, that monetize and capitalize on stoking the fear and resentment of a white population that is witnessing a changing America.
CNN's Brian Stelter joins us now. He's the author of the book Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of the Truth. And Brian, you updated your book in the paperback version to include new reporting on the post-2020 election, Fox News and more. Tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, the book required a full rewrite, Jake, because so much has happened in the last 6 months. I now open with the riot because Fox has radicalized in the past few months. I learned a lot about riot denial in working on this book, Jake, because Fox staffers who leaked to me by the dozen said they were distraught that the network has downplayed the crimes at the Capitol. They've looked the other way, made excuses for the rioters. Laura Ingraham just last night on the air saying this was not an insurrection. But of course, the voices that are leaking to me, they're the minority. Riot denial has won out at Fox. And today, the network has barely covered this new Senate report. They have stuffed this down the memory hole.
They barely covered the Senate report. It's one of the biggest stories of the day. Well, let me ask over there. Let me ask you. Fox News is now facing legal and financial ramifications. Smartmatic is suing them for $2.7 billion. Dominion is suing for $1.6 billion. This is because of the election lies that they either allowed, platformed, or shared themselves by the hosts. Has this impacted their programming at all?
Short answer is no. This is an attempt, these defamation suits, to repair the damage done by last year's big lie. But of course, the lies have mutated into new forms since then. These lawsuits may, if these companies prevail, may punish the Murdochs in their wallets eventually, years from now. But for now, it's not having a serious impact on programming. Fox's lineup has really been radicalized, even in the last 6 months. It's changed a lot as this channel has taken on with more extremely partisan content. And ultimately, it's the Murdochs who are letting that happen. By not having a strong hand on the wheel, they've allowed the car to drive off the ditch and onto the side of the road. They're letting Fox run to the right because they're afraid of Newsmax and One America News, and in some ways afraid of the former president. In the words of one source at Fox, we've turned so far right, we've turned crazy. But ultimately, that's the Murdochs who are responsible. I
have to say, I don't want to get into a dispute with you, but I don't think they're becoming more conservative. I mean, Liz Cheney is conservative. Mitt Romney is conservative. It seems
That's right. Conservative is not the word. That's right. It's this radical form of culture war programming that has very, very little to do with actual conservative values.
Yeah, that's the only point I wanted to make. Brian Stelter, thank you so much. The book is terrific. And of course, the paperback version is in stores now. Thanks so much. Congratulations. Vice President Harris is about to face reporters during her first trip abroad as vice president. Stay with us. We'll be right back. In our world lead, any minute, we're going to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris. She's wrapping up a day of meetings in Mexico, including with the country's president, as part of her first international trip as vice president. And CNN's Jeremy Diamond is live for us in Mexico City. Jeremy, today the vice president is once again pushing back on criticism on why she has not yet visited the border on this trip, which is focused on the migration crisis.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. And listen, the vice president has been asked this question many times before. And so it's strange to see that she doesn't seem to yet have a kind of clear and consistent answer on this. Yesterday, when she was asked by NBC, she compared it to not having visited Europe yet as vice president. And today, this is how she answered it when she was pressed again on this very same question of visiting the border.
Listen, I've been to the border before. I will go again. But when I'm in Guatemala dealing with root causes, I think we should have a conversation about what's going on in Guatemala.
And the shrug at the end there, Jake, is really only being followed by more criticism from Republicans who have tried to tie the vice president to the crisis at the border. Of course, Vice President Harris was assigned by President Biden to focus on the root causes of migration. So that is a false comparison that Republicans are making. But nonetheless, the vice president certainly not doing herself any favors in the way that she's been answering these questions about visiting the border. She could clear it up by saying that, yes, she intends to go and kind of letting that rest. Jake?
Yeah, no, it's curious. She's also being criticized today, this week, by progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for very directly telling migrants in Central America not to come to the United States. And look, I mean, it's true now that she's vice president and one of those in charge, she sounds quite different than the progressive presidential candidate who said in 2019, for example, that the U.S. is a, quote, nation of strength with strong arms, that when people are fleeing harm, we will embrace them, unquote.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Jake. And it's important to look at the context, too, of her remarks. It came a couple days after the Guatemalan president who she was meeting with essentially said that the Biden administration's more humane policies and the perception of those more humane policies is also, in his view at least, a root cause of migration. And so the vice president is certainly trying to tamp down any perception in the region that the Biden administration is welcoming migrants rushing to the border, with open arms. That being said, it is true. The overwhelming majority of migrants are being turned away at the border, but unaccompanied children who have been a big part of this surge that we've been seeing at the border, many of them are still being processed and accepted into the United States. But the vice president is doing a kind of tough balancing act here, especially in this region, where on the one hand, she does